So we'll do a round of introductions. First of all, did everyone enjoy the cookies? Was there any left after me? Fantastic. There was a little bit left. So before we start, each of you have got a mic that you're going to probably have to share. Can I ask you to do a very quick introduction? And how I'd like you to do it is your name, where you're from, and what have you most enjoyed about Devops Africa Day? Do you want to start?
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aziz Al-Sharafi. I flew last night from Dubai, where the weather is 48 degrees Celsius. So, the breeze was amazing last night. I'm from Australia, so this is the weather for us back in Sydney, Now it's winter, where it's, burning summer in Dubai. I lead the Devops and testing for Middle East and Africa within IBM. Been doing this for 18, 19 years. And what's interesting is there's a story every day at every client. Every client I go and visit who's interested in DevOps, you hear challenges, you hear interesting things that actually keeps you going. And there's been a lot of changes in the industry. So just a week ago, I was reading about DevSecOps, so basically adding security now to not enough that DevOps is a buzzword, now there's DevSecOps, so even saying it is weird. So probably we have to start getting practiced, DevSecOps, adding security to what we do. Thank you.
Can I make that DevSecBizOps?
I'm Ross Addis from Red Hat. I'm a senior solution architect for infrastructure and cloud products. Obviously a huge focus, if you get my presentation, is containerization, which has an important part to play in the whole DevOps thing. What I'm enjoying most about Devops Day today is, I was around it last year when it was hosted at FNB, and the level and the maturity of the conversations that are happening and what people are doing, it feels real and very interesting where people are going and what you're doing. I think we're only in the beginning of this journey, but it's very exciting to be part of this.
Thanks. My name is Derek Chung from Standard Bank. Basically, I'm a manager looking after a bunch of amazing engineers over there. Two things, I guess, I really kind of looking after in terms of Africa DevOps Day is kind of the story, the opportunities to share our story. What are we doing? We don't get kind of telling Brett earlier that 3-4 years ago there's no ways we could sit like this in a forum, right? And secondly, I know, please don't do it. The engineer's going to laugh at me because I'm sitting next to IBM. So please can you guys behave after the session?
Peter Alkemer, I look after IT for our business banking division at FNB. And what I really enjoy about being here today in any of these sessions is just being amongst like-minded professionals who have a passion for just improving the way they do things and learning from each other, because I like to try and, do that as a life philosophy. So it's great to feed off the energy that's here today.
Peter Riggs from ABSA, Chief Technology Officer, Head of Infrastructure. And I think the thing I've enjoyed the most actually is reuniting with a whole bunch of people I haven't seen for a while. And all those sidebar conversations I've probably had about 15 or 20 today, and they've been worthwhile, every single one of them, whether it's about what do we do about people in that continent versus how we're doing things differently around technology. So it's been very, very awesome to touch base on that.
So my name is Jason Suddy. I head up engineering at R&B Foundry. And what's really exciting for me about this day and all the days that have come before is we've got really smart people in the room. That's you guys. We've got real problems that we share. We've got diversity of thought, and we've got collaboration on actually solving that. And that for me is really special. Every time I go overseas and I do a talk and I share what we're doing here, people overseas cannot fathom that banks will collaborate like we are doing, and people who are in the same industries collaborate on a thing called DevOps. And so it's something really special that we've got here, and I think we need to cherish it, we need to amplify it, and it's really exciting where we're going to go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. I guess I'm most excited because I think we had a record attendance, guys. So well done to you guys for making the time, because we know it's really hectic out there at the moment. We've got to keep systems going, and we've still got to innovate and try new ways of work. So fantastic. You all did quite well, by the way. We've got quite a few questions here, by the way. I have got my question here, which is rather arbitrary. So when I do, in fact, maybe I'll challenge you guys to try and guess which one is my question. It's really bad. But before I start digging into these, I'm going to put it to the floor. Do you guys have any questions, burning questions, that you want to kick off with?
This question is to Peter. Hello, Peter, this is you. So this is Karthik here. I am a quality engineer. I would like to post a question regarding the test-driven development. So you said you have implemented test-driven development in your area. So in my opinion, test-driven development is something like a mind change that you need to give to the developers. So I would like to question you on how did you bring in that mind change to the developers, which they were doing the traditional way of coding, and what would the advice that you give if someone wants to implement the test-driven development who were already been in, like the traditional way of development? Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, I said it was one of our big challenges actually, is that to try to get people to think along those lines. And your traditional testers are manual, and they don't necessarily have the technology skill. And you really got to start bringing in the engineering discipline. So we've actually been working with one or two vendors. I can see one of them there, who's heading it up. It took us a long time to find a vendor that actually understood test-driven development. And we're bringing them in, and then we're tying in proper engineering skill to that so that we develop up front with that. And then obviously our developers themselves have to start going through that ability to write their own scripts. We haven't got scale here at all. It is one of those things that we can see. You cannot be successful until you get it right, properly successful. And we know the level of investment that's got to go into that. So we're slowly churning through that to get that into the right way of working.
I'd like us to think also about the existing testing community and the skills that are out there. I mean, how do you guys see that evolving and being able to support the development kind of reversal of everything, right? So there's a bunch of people who really understand that testing environment who could be contributing into the scripting and development side. I mean, do you see these two worlds kind of linking together, or are they at risk?
I mean, I think it's not just testing. I'll be interested to see what everybody else is, whether it's testing, whether it's infrastructure, it doesn't matter what it is. You really have to go through and understand the refactoring that has to happen and the reskilling that has to happen, because the traditional ways of working are not there. So whether a person was a really good tester and a manual tester, they were pretty good at understanding what product that they were testing. Now they should be part of, here's the product ownership and the product design that comes through there, and feeding into it. And I think every single personality will be different and be dealt in a different way. But it is a question of change is important, and everybody has to change. And as we change, we're going to have to refactor ourselves again, because everybody's going to be going through that. I don't know if anybody else has got views, but that's my view.
Yeah, I think our view is that we want career testers. We want people to see that testing is a career that they can follow. It's not an add-on to a development team. And if you can encourage people who have a quality assurance mindset and a discipline around delivering software that works according to users' requirements, as well as creating just greater team collaboration between the upstream guys cutting the code and the downstream guys who are going to log defects against them. Second of all, that self-organization, I think that the guys were talking about in one of those sessions earlier, is not only for developers but also for your testing community. So get them to self-organize around the types of tools and frameworks that they want to use. They know what's out there. They come to these days. We've got a couple of them here in the room. Let them come up with the best approaches. However, having said that, where we have vacancies and capacity opening up, we are focusing a lot more on test automation and people that have skills in writing those scripts.
So testing is always an interesting and controversial subject. I think if you look at the old ways of thought, we would have said, okay, there's the manual testing, and we'd say, okay, people do that. Then we started saying, okay, cool, let's start automating, and we've done that. And then, we said, well, who does the automation? Is it the developers? Is it the testers? How does that happen? And then we look for the T-shaped people who can do a bit of both. my view on this is that you need to use the human beings where they are best, or where they can add the greatest value, which is exploratory testing as opposed to the rudimentary regression test and those things that can be codified. Because that's where you can use the creativeness and the kind of ingenuity of the human brain, rather than repetitive things a machine can do.
I think to add on to that, I think in our journey as well, I think you'll probably know that it's probably the culture of ownership will drive quality. I mean, we always kind of talk about this. Probably quality and security are probably the most important thing to do in our DevOps journey. That's probably the hardest 2 points to actually get right. But I guess in our journey, when you kind of start to enforce a bit of ownership with certain teams, okay, they start thinking about quality, and then when they think about security, they start doing it. Okay, and I think Johan is one of the guys, Johan Jordan, he said TDD is common sense, right? It's just that old cultures, old ways of work makes it tremendously hard. But as you start to unwind that on the journey, I think people themselves will understand that going through this common sense just makes life a lot easier. It's very difficult, though. I think that's probably, in our journey, it's the most difficult place to actually get right.
I'd like to pick up on the points around quality, right? So we're in this world where we're trying to drop code as quickly as we can, and we're working in this mindset of delivering, say, a minimal viable product, for instance. Now, that balance of releasing code at a high velocity and trying to get the quality right, I'd love to get your guys' view on that. Like, how would you manage it? If you were sitting there trying to find the balance of what actually goes into my MVP and how do I make sure that I meet the quality and standards that's required? What are some of those challenges, or how would you go about kind of managing that situation?
Well, our approach is maybe talking about the speed. It's fail early and fail often, so that you at least know that there's a problem long before it reaches anywhere near production. So I think the speed talks around the process and having more automation around that, of course, to identify when there's an issue with the code. So it's not necessary because it's going faster, it's going to be a lower quality. I think it's going faster so problems can be solved faster.
So, in my opinion, you cannot talk MVPs without talking continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous testing. If we are at a maturity level where you have MVP, a minimal viable product exists, which means the organization has some lean practices. So MVP without the other practices, it's going to be very difficult. Now, how you define your MVP as you start to embrace things like design thinking, which is a buzzword that's happening a lot these days. Blockchain, for example, where a lot of banks are actually now moving into this. This whole practices make sense. So if you are dropping code, but you are getting one of the dashboards that you get in any agile tool, in any ALM tool, without mentioning names, is the quality of the build. If you are getting a lot of builds with failure or the health is bad, this means you didn't achieve anything. Yes, you have continuous integration, but because you don't have continuous testing, unit testing, TDD, integration testing, this means you have implemented cruise control, for example, but you have failed other things because your matrices will start to look very bad. The more failures, it's great within a DevOps journey, but if you don't have measures to rectify those failures as soon as possible, this means you are shooting yourself in the foot.
At this point, does anyone have any questions around quality and trying to merge the world of testing and automation? Any other questions, or can I go forward? Okay. So, again, there are a lot of people who are just starting their journey in the world of getting DevOps right. And I think we're all kind of guessing that everyone's at a certain point. I mean, if you were to redo your journey, where would you start? I mean, what is that first step? Is it tooling? Is it just getting people together? I'd love to get some advice for the guys who are literally beginning their journey now, and they don't have to go through the same stumbling blocks you guys have gone through.
I'd love to answer this question. I'll tell a story about cargo culting. Has anybody heard the story in the room at all? Okay. So that threw me. So basically in the Second World War, there was a bunch of US soldiers and they were stationed on the South Pacific island. And they were stationed there and the war carried on. And what used to happen from time to time was that supplies would be parachuted in right? And so the plane would fly over, drop some supplies, the soldiers would get some cool food, they'd carry on. But then the war ended, and the soldiers went back to their home, and probably 30, 40 years passed, and then there was an anthropologist who went to the island in the early 70s, and he found this native tribe there. And what he found was basically this practice where the tribe were worshipping the gods of cargo. And they had this ritual about praying to the gods of cargo to bring more cargo because there was great stuff in it. So the moral of the story is, don't start with practices because and don't start with tools, because doing a ritual means you're just walking around like a robot, not actually knowing what you're doing. Start with why. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve? What are your principles? Start with that level of conversation. Otherwise, you tend to find a lot of people doing this ritual but having no understanding of why they're doing it and what value is being derived from it.
Any other opinions? I think that's a great approach.
So a little bit upstream in the agile world potentially, but also some relevance. Definitely agree that the focus has got to be on people. And 2 years ago, we drove a strong approach to just getting meaningful conversations working between people, opening up informal lines of communication, getting people out of their desks and talking. And then on top of that, you start to build in a little bit of awareness around principles. And then importantly, I have the strong view that you need to be very agile, small a, about your agile, capital A journey. And, when you start just adopting a new set of terminology and jargon, it's the quickest way to turn business off. And we took a lot of detours around ways of doing things. And again, the fail fast mindset must also be applied to your own transformation in whatever ways of working that you're trying to introduce. And you need to be demonstrating that you're very quick to change those if they're not working. And you're not going to determine their success. It's your internal or external customers that are using your software and how well they're adopting it. What is the quality of that feedback loop into your environment? And that fifth principle of the Agile Manifesto, which talks about the trusted and supportive environment. And if there's leaders, we're all leaders, if you heard from the session just now. We all have responsibility to create the environment within which, and most of us operate in tough corporate cultures where there are layers of control. And as much as we can create a safe environment, like we do on a fairly large scale at CodeFest every year, and we allow guys to come in and experiment, and everybody else on this panel is also doing that. Try and replicate that back at the office and create safe environments within which people can work in their two-pizza teams without fear of recrimination. So keep the managers out of your daily stand-ups. Make sure that you stick to the Scrum principles. Make sure that you allow dissension. People can speak their minds. And they will self-organize around the things that are going to work in your specific environment.
I mean, compliance keeps on coming up in a lot of these notes, and trying to manage compliance. And there are various ways. I'd love to kind of get some feedback from you guys, your experience of the regulatory environments, the risk environments. How have you tackled it? Have you taken them on a path? Have you just smashed them head on? And there must be some interesting stories there, right? Not just answer.
So I think one of the things about compliance is that when we work on these Devops journey, that's the first thing they ask you. Are you you're going to break these rules? What I do find is actually when we think about it, nobody can actually tell us exactly which rule. And going back, what actually compliance acts. A very interesting one is we're automating one of our during switch our kind of card processing environment, and like, no, you can't do this. It goes against PCI compliance. Cool. What is it? All right. And then what we do find out is that include those guys from risk and compliance. Okay? And we generally don't. We make assumptions because some of the rules actually were made 20 years ago, and the audit and compliance committees themselves actually admit that they probably don't even exist anymore. Some of the practices we try to do is revert back to the Reserve Bank, in terms of does this still actually apply? A lot of times they're like, oh no, actually we should actually relook at that. I think my recommendation is that just include your risk and security guys on top of that and make them that trusted advisor on the journey. We always get success, and you can almost see that with the teams that we include security first. they make our lives so much easier on that journey. And look, the automation stuff is also kind of quite important, right? At the point in time where we're writing so much software, and it's everywhere, it's invisible as well. Software is invisible, slightly different to Toyota manufacturing. Is that you can see the car in Toyota, but you can't see the software. You're right. That automation, it's not humanly possible to actually manually check compliance for everything. And I can guarantee you, the next day, something's changed, compliance gets turned around. So my experience around this, when I speak to especially the guys in compliance and audit, they're so keen to help us, at least with the Standard Bank perspective. But we always make these guys, they think they're so backwards, they never want to be part of it. We get a lot of success with the compliance teams, actually, more than IT people within Standard Bank around the journeys we want to adopt.
I guess at the end of the day, compliance is about protecting your customer, right? Does anyone else have a napper? Sorry, that's an internal joke. But it is about protecting the customer. Sorry, Peter, go for it.
I was just going to say, and it's very similar to what Derek was saying, is that you bring in your, for example, risk IT guy. My risk IT guy, I think he's in the crowd here somewhere still, I don't know, but he sits in my management team and my daily stand-ups, and actually he's become part of the Devops journey. He has built a governance approval process, which is actually software in the cloud that is used to automate and allow us to do straight-through processing, and it was him that drove it. So I think it's all about bringing the people close. They want to be part of the journey. And although we've not got every control dealt yet, but it's a framework that is going to allow us continuous integration and continuous delivery in the way that it operates. So bring them close.
It's actually, go for it.
I'd just like to add, the one thing I'd add is also don't be afraid to get your hands dirty and write a policy or two.
What? A policy?
Oh yes, a policy. FirstRand secure coding standards, the best 6 months of my life. And it was worth it because, you had the collaboration, you had to take the guys to a couple of lunches, and at the end, actually everybody's going to benefit.
So I want to share actually something from my experience because we learn every day. So I run what's called a DevOps optimization and innovation workshop. And a few years back, I was running this workshop for a telecom somewhere in the region, in MIA, and I learned something on the importance of culture. So, if you go a few years back, as we do agile development, iterative development, CNMI, we always tend to focus on improving the IT team, improving the development, and improving testing. In that workshop, one of the problems that came up was procurement procedures. And that was probably the first time I would get that as a challenge. And as I actually start to go down deeper in the discussion, what has procurement procedures, to be an obstacle in a DevOps journey? And apparently it was a big obstacle. So how come? That telecom is using vendors. They don't have in-house development. So the vendors will be delivering packages for deployment. If you want to embrace the DevOps journey, time and material is very important. Because if you go with fixed price, if the vendor delivers under time, the procurement will think, they overquoted us. If they deliver over time, there's penalties. So how would you actually work with vendors within a DevOps agile practice if you are saying to them you have to deliver as per the committed time? So if they actually delivered faster, they are actually going to be non-compliant. And like I said, if they delivered overtime, they will be paying penalties. So changing the policies of that procurement department was the biggest challenge the CIO had. Because that's the time where the CIO will have to go to the CEO, to the COO, to the CFO to start saying, hold on, your procurement procedure, the purchases has to change for me to implement DevOps with all the vendors that I'm working with. And it takes us to one thing, culture, which actually could shoot you. So this time, that telecom, it wasn't IT, it wasn't testing, it wasn't ops, it was something that you wouldn't even think of. Because how many in the room actually thinks procurement? We know procurement will take 2-3 weeks to approve the RFP. That's, the worst thing. But in this case, procurement actually was the reason why that telecom could not embrace DevOps unless they changed that journey.
Actually, you've got a good point around value. So you start thinking about the value of time and effort. And even working with partners, that's interesting, right? We've kind of forced everyone into an hourly costing model. And if you think about it, like it's kind of penalizing the environment rather than rewarding, especially in that world of agile and lean startup where we want the most talent from partners to be able to make sure that we get to market as quickly as we can. So how do we motivate partners to change their pricing model that encourages speed to market rather than how do we drag this out and recover cost of sale and all that kind of stuff? I'd love to get your guys' view as procurers of partners' technology.
So I find that very interesting, actually, because it happens that startups, partners who are startups, tend to actually improve their quality to, make a point to actually win becoming a vendor. Where companies like, for example, Wipro, we all know Wipro, Infosys, Tata, all those big companies, you will find that they have a price for when they want to be agile, and they have another price when they want to actually be using legacy practices. So I guess, from my view, is the more we open chances for those startups to become vendors, if we make it easy for them, you'll be actually getting the best of the breed rather than getting the dinosaurs. Yes, the dinosaurs have a lot of experience and they have a lot of lessons learned, but it comes at a price as well. Because they have their own procedures, their own methodologies, and sometimes for them to embrace your own methodology, it will be very difficult.
Any other views?
I think I'll be a bit controversial in this specific one, is that do we really work with partners or do you actually work with the vendors? Okay, and I think it's really around how vendors actually start thinking about being partners. And I think one of the more critical ones, we had a discussion kind of with Red Hats Australia about a kind of month ago around this with another bank, was that everyone wants to move off the mainframe, right? The IBM mainframe. Why? Because IBM refuses to change the way they license the software. And because of that, it's causing people to move to the mainframe. And that behavior probably started, 15, 20 years ago from that perspective, and it's caused us to not go into mainframe, because every single transaction that goes through mainframe somehow ends up in IBM's lap as well. And I think, again, we talk about partners. Are we really partners, or are we just a vendor relationship? Then, that it's a very transactional relationship. And I think vendors on its own need to start thinking slightly differently around how we transact against that, and especially the old big four ones. So, the whole IBM, the Oracles, the Dell EMCs, etc., is that the startups are coming and eating your breakfast, for example. A very good example was Pure Store. Pure Storage devices, they pretty much very expensive, but the technology they provide, for example, it's a real partnership. If they don't achieve this, cool, I'll give you another storage device for free. That's a typical example where they're actually willing to put money where their mouth is. Okay, so I haven't seen that specifically, especially probably maybe in the Africa kind of perspective. I'm not sure if the mindset had changed yet on that. And equally on the other side, we're fairly guilty of some of that as well. I do think that using DevOps to drive costs down is probably the biggest mistake any organization will actually make along the journey. It's a detrimental reason to actually adopt DevOps. It's not really about that. It's about the opportunity cost that in organizations we stand to lose if we're just not flexible or fast enough.
It's very, very similar. It's about partnership. And I think we've ejected quite a lot of vendors because of the nature that they come and work with us. And I spoke earlier about cross-functional product teams, etc. And that is not in the traditional way of operating. So put them in the team and we work together in the way that it operates. A lot of my vendors now work on retainers and we just drill down on them because they're part of the team and they just become part of the future journey because they're embedded in the right way. So if you're not part of the team, then you're not there at all. That's the way that we operate. There is no place for a single person that's going to carry our future.
Just on your topic around value and cost, and the guys in the big organizations will understand this. By the time we've added our fully absorbed accounting methods on the hourly rates of the vendors and passed it on to the departments that are actually owning these costs in their budgets, it's been inflated by multiples. So, there's a compound effect and a compound scrutiny on costs because of the inefficiencies and the bureaucracies in a large organization. So that compounds the issue, and it compounds the pressure on this need to demonstrate business value as early on in your projects, and this is where Agile and DevOps is powering that sort of innovative way of working. And I think to echo the sentiments on the panel, people will buy from people will partner with people, and people will want to get behind projects and software that they can see some sort of halo effect and compound value from the good that will be created from that project. And people will actually, and given the skills capacity issue in this country, the top guys could choose wherever they want to work. We lost a guy the other day, one of our top developers, and he went to go and work for BMW self-drive software. And,
Terrible job. Who would want to do that?
And he's working from home. He goes into the office once a day. And, no amount of money that you throw at a guy like that, to get that opportunity. So if you can create projects and software, and just to come back to the risk conversation, the reason you want to take people with you, like the gents on my right and left have said over here, is because those risk people also are people, don't forget, and they have careers, and there's a halo effect from projects that they're allocated to. And when guys at the top start questioning what is happening with projects, the ones that are able to show value and progress attract the people who want to make a difference. So there's a compound or a virtuous cycle, if you like. If you can create projects that get momentum and progress, you will attract the better quality IT risk managers, you'll attract the better quality vendors, you'll attract the better quality procurement consultants, etc. And that, I think, there's a challenge for leadership to create those projects that attract the right people, which has a compound effect of improving the overall output.
So there's a couple of things there I'm going to pick up. But before I do we have any questions? Right over there. Do we have a roaming mic? Thank you.
Okay. I have two questions. The first one is something that actually most of us don't want to talk about, which is money. We talk about teams, right? Not individuals. So my questions to you is, how are you rewarding your teams, right? And making them awesome at the end of the day. So the second one would be, we have the country culture, where I was born, how I was raised, and then where he was born, how he was raised, and then we have the organizational culture, right? How are you guys managing the two? Because we talk about relatedness in the organization, and I find it that questionable.
Just a quick answer, and I'll hand it to Peter. Values. So dignity, mutual respect. We're all human. Our blood is all red, regardless. And you start from that basis, and then you celebrate the differences as things that people can feed off and get value from. And if you start from a point of difference in culture or skin color or anything else, you're going to propagate reasons to disagree. If you start from a point of view of we're all in this together, we're all humans, we're all like-minded, we want to achieve something, that's what we try and achieve. And the challenge that we have around remuneration is that the performance management process is often very standardized, and it is anti-self-organization because people want to create value individually, whereas DevOps and Agile says, well, if you've got a bonus pool, give it to the team. They can self-organize how they reward themselves. That's very difficult to do in a large bank.
Yeah, so on the HR process, definitely your point's correct. We struggle with the way it's defined from the top down. And we're working on different programs to try to get that right. And actually last year in my team we had some shadow HR, if you wanted to call it, underneath, saying this is what we feed to the organization and this is what we're doing actually. So that's a starting point. But what I can say is we're actually getting this understood from the top of the organization now. And they are looking at how do they change these mechanisms of rewarding. And I think it's not going to be done by this year, but it is a journey that we're on, and we get teams rewarded in the appropriate way. And even in my own management team now, we run a value system. We check once a month. Everybody just does a quick check between each other's values. It raises issues, and you deal those values. And very, very quickly, I used the word eject earlier. People that are not sitting with the right values get ejected out of the team. It happens. I don't have to do anything. My management team does it around them. So I think it's a very, very important piece. And actually, I'm a big fan of this diversity thing. So I'm glad that the people are different. I'm glad that the organization is different. We have to change the organization, but mix people up as much as we can. You really get some brilliant thoughts, particularly if you allow it. So get that freedom. It's key.
So diversity. I mean, this is. I think this is the thing of which magic is made. In our team, we've got a rocket scientist, a couple of engineers, an actor. So never mind diversity of kind of background and upbringing. It's diversity of what you do. And I really think what you want is you want this diversity of thought. You want people to have different opinions and be in a safe place where they can share those and be heard and not be shot down. Remuneration, always a challenge. We're doing some experiments around remuneration and sharing the remuneration in our team. It's a lot of discomfort because as much as you principally agree, when you're in it, it's actually quite hard. So that's going to be interesting. And it will come right in time. I think all of this is a journey. I don't think you're ever going to be done in DevOps and in life.
So I think, in my opinion, on this, kind of from an engineering perspective, is that remuneration organization, I think all the companies are doing it. If we're not doing it, we'll be in trouble because an APSA is doing it, an F&B or R&B is actually doing it, and you'll end up losing your people, right? It's almost non-negotiable. What I do know is, look, from a DevOps engineering, for lack of a better word, perspective, is highly sought after. So if you kind of get into that kind of automation, coding, engineering, kind of technical skill, agile coaching, that kind of capability, you'll find a job anywhere in the world. In US, especially if you're female, there's got a big dearth of kind of diversity in that space. But I think more importantly is to understand what engineers want. I've probably used the open source as an example, right? The open source kind of revolution. People are contributing code around the world with each other. They don't ask for a cent. What's important, though, is a bit of recognition, a bit of, I committed a piece of code. I'm actually quite proud of it because I made a change to someone somehow. Okay, but I actually don't ask for anything back. I think that rings very true. I think around engineering teams, to come out to say that I've done something, extremely proud. If I look at kind of, if you guys were at Marcus's talk, they implemented a system called Skynet. It came out of the blue. Should we do it? Okay, cool, let's go do it. We've done about 6,500 machine builds in the last 18 months. Okay, the guys are very proud, right? They don't talk to me about their salaries, etc. They want to do something. They want to put on their CVs that I helped Standard Bank build an automated provisioning system, for example, and I made somebody else's life easier. I think I'm starting to see that, especially with the younger generation. Okay, it's about the greater good that a lot of engineers are wanting to do. Very often they don't talk to you about the money. Okay, we know if you do that, by implication, the market will say, listen, if I underpay in Cooley, for example, I can guarantee you Rix will come and hire you at double your current salary. No, sorry, I don't say anything. But by implication, it will come. Okay, especially in the South African context. Okay, technical skills is such a kind of problem that we have at the moment. I mean, everyone will talk about it. All the CIOs will talk about it. We just can't find the right technical skills we want in an organization. And they'll pay a lot of money for that.
Ask any Java engineer. Question, I saw a hand go up. Just at the back, two hands. I can't decide who got their hand up first.
Okay, I have a question around quality. Does DevOps improve the quality of the product? Meaning that does DevOps improve the quality of the software product? If so, how and why? And do you have any empirical evidence to support or validate that statement? The last question is, what are the challenges involved in implementing DevOps? Because I'm hearing benefits. There are definitely challenges. What challenges exist in implementing DevOps?
Thank you. Who'd like to pick up on that first? I'll pick up on the challenges first as a recommendation. So what challenges do you have to overcome?
I think one of my examples are challenges around DevOps. I think institutional memory is probably the biggest challenge that we face. Because you did something yesterday, it doesn't mean that it's right today or tomorrow. In my kind of journey, in Standard Bank around it, a lot of it is that. is convincing, talking to a Linux engineer that, for example, why would you want to spend 4 hours of your life every single day building one machine? And then when you finish with that, you do another one and take another 4 hours. And you wake up, you go to sleep, you wake up tomorrow and you do it again. Okay, is that really what you want to kind of be from engineering perspective? Oh, but that's how we've always done it. Okay, those are big challenges to move around. I think that cultural mindset, whether it's a manager or the engineer thinking like that, to unwind that, untangle that, has been tremendously difficult. But if you get it right, if you convince one engineer right out of the 10, okay, that engineer could actually spawn an exponential growth from a change perspective in the organization. So for me, I think the people side of things, the convincing people to change has been very difficult. I think a nice example would be probably driving a car, convincing somebody, if you love racing, driving manual car, driving automatic, it's great, but that first 2 days isn't easy. Like trying to do a clutch on the car, that's change, right? And to change somebody's behaviors and patterns historically is probably the most difficult one to do. I think if you kind of ask the guys here, they're probably more therapists nowadays than actual managers, right? That's what you have to do. You have to assure people that what you're doing is for the greater good for the organization and themselves.
You also asked about the benefits and can you see them or can't you see them? And I think categorically we can see them coming through. Stuff that used to take us 6-7 months to do, we're doing in a month. It's particularly in the mobile world, that area, it's happening extremely quickly. Our mean time to repair when something goes wrong is gone from hours in many cases down to tens of minutes maybe, because you can recover a lot quicker in the way that we operate. And those aren't big revenue generating things, but they are about the quality that has been pushed through. And we have many, many cases of that in the way that we operate. So it is pretty well supported, very high up in the organization because they're seeing that change come through.
So what I've seen around with a couple of customers, it's as Derek said, these old legacy processes, and because we've done it, because we've always done it, that's why they continue to do it. That's an inhibitor to a lot of these projects. Another one is maybe what I've seen some of my customers getting into DevOps maybe for the wrong reason, because it's a buzzword out there. It's like, you need to really understand it and know why you're getting into it, not just adopt it because everyone else is. I've had, just to simplify it, but I've had basically customers contacting me and saying, we'd like to buy a DevOps from Red Hat. I mean, you're probably looking at it the wrong way. So don't just adopt it because everyone else is. You really need to understand it, and sometimes those customers are just adopting a buzzword. And you're going to fail, probably.
So I want to touch on the question, would embracing DevOps improve quality? DevOps capitalizes on few best practices that existed for years. So you cannot be DevOps without being agile. You cannot have DevOps if you don't have continuous testing or, like I said, continuous deployment. I shared a story earlier about something that I actually personally faced. So I was traveling to visit a central bank of a certain country, without mentioning the country because it's a central bank, so obviously it will be exposed, to talk about DevOps. And speaking to the head of operation, what's your problem, what's your challenges? And he says to me, my challenge is the USB. And people heard this before. And I thought immediately, maybe USB stands for something that I don't know about. I didn't think it's the flash drive. Just, I thought, I don't know everything. And then I said to him, USB. Can you elaborate? And he said to me, USB. And he actually raised the USB. I said, okay, maybe that's encrypted and I'm not aware of it. And I said to him, what's the problem? He said to me, my problem is the developer forgetting to give this USB to the ops team before he goes home to go to production. So I was thinking, okay, I don't want to laugh because, I'm a vendor, and if I laugh, I'll be kicked out. So how does this happen? So I wanted to, make important. We test on a test environment, and I will never expose my test environment to my production environment. So there goes auto promotion. Immediately, I dropped it. So the developers are asked to take the USB and give it through a small window, literally, and there's a picture that will go to production. And the developers will take the USB home. Developer will give the wrong USB. So we color-coded the USB. So the moral of the story is, I couldn't talk to them about DevOps because it's like, kindergarten to university. So I had to go and talk to them about networks first, opening ports, source control management before we even start talking about DevOps, because it embraces so many things. So will it improve quality? It would if you embraced all the best practices that being in a DevOps culture brings to you.
I think a well-known challenge is, just to build on what the guys have been saying, that we tend to organize in the large environments around common skills or platforms or domains. And then we drive efficiency and utilization by maximizing the busyness of the people in those teams. But that works completely against the value chains that we're all trying to create across our organizations, where the value to our customers actually comes from orchestrating across all of those different areas. So as much as you can bring people together, and it's a very simple thing of just co-locating them, and all of us up here are doing that as much as possible. And we saw at the last DevOps Day, ABSA's Collabs environment and what they're doing in their Towers North world. And if you read Standard Bank's interview with McKinsey end of last year, huge progress around bringing those teams together. But again, it's the heads of those areas that must give up the control of their people. And you actually want them to come in and not see their people literally. And they must be in the different project war rooms, working on creating and delivering those projects. That for me, I think, is the single biggest challenge. You see Scrum teams being set up, but they're missing key functions. And right down to that node of test, build, design, manage, all of those capabilities need to be at the lowest level of cooperation at a team level. Works completely against the enterprise structure. And that's why you've got a procurement department and an HR department and a finance department. So now we've got customer IT and analytics all spread out. These things need to be together. And that's what we've got to drive as strongly as we possibly can to achieve the benefits that you want.
Saw a question in the middle there. And then ladies first. And then, did you have your hand up? Okay. Great questions, by the way, everybody.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm from Standard Bank, and I'm part of a release train with about 18 feature teams. And we do DevOps, but really hardcore ops. So if you think about it, of a team of 8 to 9 people, 2 people are on standby constantly. So one person works the whole night, ask her not to come in the morning because she's too grumpy, and then the next day another person's on standby the whole day, which really leaves only a few developers, and normally those are the senior guys as well, which leaves the more junior developers to do the dev. Then we have to throw in all the security stuff we have to do, and we have to throw in all the automation we have to do, so those 2 don't have to get up all night. And then we throw in the compliance stuff, the regulatory stuff, and then really there's such a small portion left in our velocity for real dev. So much so that we had to throttle our business demand quite a bit. So what is the best way to approach, what is the ratio we're looking for? I thought, is it just a phase we're going through? Is it a common problem? I just wanted to hear your views.
I don't think there's a specific ratio, but what I would say to you is you need to look at creating the capacity to sharpen your axe, because if you've got this operational load where you've got 2 people working kind of crazy hours, the question is what is driving that and what can you do to not have that? And if you can create the space to address the root cause, I think you can create the breathing room for your team. Now, that's easily said, and doing it's a lot harder because, of course, you need to manage expectation from your business, and they've got projects and deliveries and that kind of thing. I think it's a very common challenge that we all have around what is the right balance between product build and making sure that we're doing the right practices. So Yusuf talked about how his business is structured around practice and making sure that we keep our axe sharpened versus product. Now, I don't have the answer, but what I can tell you is when you just have products, the wheels come off, you get technical debt, you actually just end up moving so slowly that you hamstring the business. So there is business value in dealing with that technical debt. There's no silver bullet. You've got to have that discussion. You've got to educate your business about technical debt. And you've got to create that space to sharpen the axe so that you can have this ability to be sustainable. Otherwise, you get to a point where you can't move, and then it's, oh, let's throw it out, guys. We've got to refactor it, or we've got to rewrite it, and we all know how well that goes.
Second, third time, fourth time. Anyone else?
One of the views I have is that I think as technologists, we are very guilty of not explaining to the business the impact of the things we do for them. Okay. Oh, by the way, if you do this, you're going to get technical debt. Cool. The business will just move on. And, we kind of say, a lot of discussions we have is we blame the business for actually shoving too much into too much load. But what's the natural reaction when they do it? We just say yes, right? We were traditionally a cost center from a tech perspective. And you turn it around. So, dear business, if we do this, by the way, you risk that 6 weeks down the line, you possibly may have a 2-day downtime. Are you actually willing to accept that? Okay. We need to get to a point where we can communicate those, ramifications on the decisions we do. I think sometimes either we get lazy or we just got into that kind of historical behavior of getting beaten up by the business and we don't say anything, we're a bit scared, that kind of thing. It is time to actually make a stand because we're the ones that end up supporting the systems, not the business. And when it goes down, again, it gets thrown away. The collaboration is key, and I think that's probably, I think a lot of organizations are having issues around product owners not appreciating technical implementations well enough. And we wish, right, that product owners actually, or product owners and managers that we hire could just understand a bit better that technical implementations aren't straightforward. Okay, this is not we don't work in a world where you can just buy a server from Amazon, etc. We have big data centers we want to run. But the language needs to change, and it's up to us. I don't think it's always up to the business to expect them to change. Is probably one of the guidelines I would give.
I think we've got one more. We've got enough time for. Should we do 2 more questions? The gentleman over there and ladies first. How desperate is your question? Sorry. I meant to. Sorry. Where's the gentleman? No, sorry. No, go for it. I was talking about this guy over here. Sorry. Go for it. In the middle, yeah. And then you at the back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I assume leadership one day. Thank you. I come from a university. My name is Nemaya Mavetera. I'm looking at all that we have discussed here. And I need to mention that we had so many of our students who are going to come and join your institutions. And they have been asking a lot of questions. You could tell by the way they were asking the questions that they are doing some research in this field. I'm now looking at, they are not questions actually, they are pointers. I'm now looking at how could we come up with a team or a working group that helps us implement Devops into the curriculum at universities. Also, I discovered that there is a story to be told. This is mostly about African institutions that are embarking on Devops. In your different institutions, are we documenting our practices? Because we want, at one point in time, to have the same story that documents the African story about Devops implementation. We are also looking at, are we going to have a maturity model for Devops implementation in the African institutions? And if you check, we are dealing with many financial sector institutions here. They are not the only ones that are really into software systems development. How are we going to reach out to many of them? I need to mention that 2 weeks ago I was at a public sector IT forum. They are going to start an innovation hub. I consult for Northwest Provincial Government. We are actually in the process of developing an innovation hub for the province, which we think can be a blueprint for other provinces. How are you, as people who have been into DevOps, going to come in and we start implementing DevOps practices in those innovation hubs, because we are going to bring in young entrepreneurs who are going to develop systems and the like. And lastly, there is quite a lot, I just have to cut it short. And lastly, there is nothing, thank you.
It was quite a long list. So if you want help integrating DevOps into the curriculum, I'm putting up my hand, come speak to me, and I think everybody on the forum here will probably do the same. Yusuf's particularly passionate, being that that's one of the things he does. I think the incubation hubs are brilliant. I think that's a very useful thing for the country. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see first-class IT solutions in our government, not just SARS, because SARS are really good at collections, which is fantastic, awesome. We'd like to see more of that. And if you can open up the doors for us to do that, that would be amazing for the country.
I think if you look at the evolution of today, so the DevOps movement started a couple of years ago by Peter and Yusuf, and what it's grown to today and the collaboration that it's achieved across the banks must also extend into the learning sector. And I know from our last chat, we want to get a bit of an advisory board going, and we've already had representation from a number of the universities, and we must continue that journey. So between the institutions, the learning, and the partners, that's the community of decision makers and influential thinkers that I think we must continue to leverage between these events, not just at these sessions. But the universities have a real challenge because their teacher class model has a limited capacity. So they're under massive pressure. And I work quite closely with the guys at WITS, going from an average class size or an intake of whatever it is, 200 to now adding on another 150 without additional budget to go and hire additional lecturers, etc. That learning method, I think, we've got to innovate. If you look at a model like We Think Code and the way they're disrupting the learning model, I think I'm going to be taking a couple of the lecturers from WITS across to them to go and have a look at the way they're doing things. But interestingly enough, they too are saying we're getting the technology right and we're adopting this peer-to-peer learning capability, but it's the practices that their people are going to come into contact with and that they need to be ready for by the time they get into meaningful employment. So I fully agree with you. If you can build that in, and the practical side of it must come through internships and on the ground, real experience to the tough environments that they're going to come in contact with in an FNB and an ABSA and a Standard Bank and wherever.
So, Magaliso, you're still here? He's dodged to go home early. I'll have a chat to him tomorrow. Yusuf actually hired a guy. He used to be a grad, I think, at the bank, and he kind of hired him specifically to report into him, and what we call him a talent scout, working with companies like We Can Code, I think specifically CodeX in Cape Town. And we have specific targets. By the end of this year, you will sponsor X amount, and we'll hire 10 of these from these kind of pipeline organizations that are helping, taking people off the streets and teach them how to code. So I think that we're doing a lot of different things. And Cooley over there was a nice example of coming through our learnership, and kind of slaving himself through Java. Sorry for that. Proving to be one of our kind of, without any kind of legacy in his mindset, you can teach this guy chef in 3 months, and he's running our chef environment for us to an extent, right? And we are doing different things around it. Olo, who actually, what university are you from? Northwest? Where? You went to, cool, that's a great university. It's quite competitive, right? So Olo, 2 weeks' time, he's going to give chef training for UJ students because of Yusuf's relationship. I think we did it last year, and the guys loved it. Okay, there was one challenge. University students could not understand why. Okay, we do this in an organization. Because think about it, from an education perspective, they're not taught that when you get into an organization, when you want a server, you have to beg, plead, fill up 1 different forms, historically to get something. And it was hard for us, actually, when we had to go into to kind of teach students around it. And we are working with them to actually get them understand this is kind of a complete turnaround on a mindset perspective. So I think we are trying different things to see how it goes. But the recognition to actually source locally has been critically important for us. I think it's just not sustainable for us to source from organizations, kind of people from around the world in a sustainable fashion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take one last question, lady in the back. Because I think everyone's desperate for some cocktails, right?
I'll do a quick question. I want to ask about process. Now that we're doing a DevOps process, did you have to change your existing processes? For example, change control meetings and the like. Will you still do these? Because I have pressure from people saying, we want to get to a point where we're doing multiple releases into production every day. Not that we're there yet at all, but we want to get to that point. But at the same time, we're having once a week change control meetings. People are too scared that if we deploy to production too quickly, we can be breaking other people's stuff downstream. So how do you balance quickly getting into production with not breaking stuff? And do you still do change controls? Like, what are the process changes? And how do you get that feeling of like comfort that things will be safe when you go to production?
I think this is the complexity we live with, where those teams that are actually pretty mature can go ahead and do this type of stuff, and those ones that are not can't, and then they end up falling over each other. And it's one of the core things that we've got to try to get right. You can't get DevOps and continuous integration running properly throughout the whole organization until the whole organization is running that way. But what we are trying to do is we're automating as much governance processes as we can, which includes talking to our CMDB automatically, which includes doing a whole lot of control checks. I spoke earlier about this GAP process we've got called the governance approval process, which is a piece of software that does that. And those people that are getting that right, and if they're ticking particular levels of risk in what they do, automatically can go through to production. There's only a small handful of people that can do that. The rest are in the standard cabs at the moment and running that way. And slowly but surely we'll carve that out. But I also think that there's a lot of value again on this, deliver a little bit all the time with the ability to roll back or to kill and do something differently, because it reduces risk massively. When you go and do a 6-month deployment, the risk is just so high that you have to go through CAB processes. One little change here, one little change there, even if it's flagged, it's off, and it's sitting in production, makes a massive difference.
Last comment?
So I think, mentioning multi-speed IT is a good answer to this, because you need to have some segregation between the type of applications you're running. So for example, your core banking application, you cannot really go to production every day because that's your bread and butter, that's your core banking. So when we say systems of record, systems of engagements, you can actually accommodate multiple releases for a mobile app if you are really very innovative in the ideas. If you are integrating with things like, all those changes that's happening, with all the technology, with cognitive, but with systems of records, your CRM, your core banking, I think they still need to go through that risk governance process. And at the end, you need to probably balance the speed of your new innovative systems between your existing core systems that actually are the business itself. So that's technically probably maybe it's a bit theoretical, but I think multi-speed IT could be the way you embrace such things between all the change control boards and the CAB meetings and all the multiple frequent releases.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, and I guess in our future Africa DevOps, it'll be gentlemen and ladies. Thank you very much. We have a couple of bottles of wine there for all the speakers and for all the panelists. I'm going to quickly rattle out your first names. We're going to find a good-looking gentleman to hand them out to. Attila. So I'm going to quickly rattle off the names. But before I do that, I'd like to thank all of you. I think you've been fantastic. For the guys who are around, found the time to do it, please give yourselves a round of applause. To Kirshni and her team for making this happen, and all the financial institutions who put the funding and effort behind this, a round of applause for them as well, please. And I don't think we always cover our tech teams who have done a phenomenal job across the entire event and the event venues. Well done to them. One last applause for them. So guys, as I call out your name, if you can just go up, and if we give them a quick round of applause, I'm going to just do first names. So Peter, Jason, Aziz, Derek, Ross, Andrew Holt, Andrew Stagnall, Benjamin, Bias, Brian Lecker, Daniel Acton, Yosef Nochia, Kevin, Luke, and Peter Moon. So whoever's still here, you're lucky you get drunk. Now, on that note of getting drunk, the bar awaits. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Until next year, all the best.